His name is Michael Atkinson, adventure filmmaker, former military pilot, a man who spent a significant chapter of his life inside the Australian Defence Force, not just flying aircraft, but learning something far more fundamental: how to stay alive, and then teaching that same skill to other people who faced mortal stakes every single day on the job. But there comes a point where knowing how to survive isn't enough anymore. There comes a point where a person needs to find out exactly where their own limits are. Not in a classroom, not in a briefing room, but with their own hands. That's exactly what Michael decided to do. He made a decision that sounds, on the surface, like something between a vision quest and a fever dream. He was going to take a massive tree trunk, the single log, and carve it by hand into a small boat. Not buy a boat, not commission one. Build one, from scratch, the ancient way. And then he was going to take that boat alone on a 930-mile journey along Australia's Great Barrier Reef. That's roughly the distance from New York City to Jacksonville, Florida. Solo, in a hollowed-out log. Sounds like madness. In practice, it was something far harder than that, because this wasn't some modern watercraft. What Michael was building is called a dugout canoe, one of the oldest boat-building technologies in human history. For thousands of years, cultures all over the world built these vessels the same way. You take a single tree trunk and you hollow it out. No power tools, no assembly line. Just handwork and patience measured in weeks, sometimes months. The process looks deceptively simple from the outside. You're removing the inner wood, carefully, deliberately, while leaving the outer shell completely intact. Because that outer shell becomes the hull. That's what floats. And this is where the entire enterprise teeters on a razor's edge. Cut too deep and the wood weakens. The structural integrity collapses. You've just destroyed your boat. Cut too shallow and the hull stays too heavy. It won't sit right in the water. It won't float properly. You've also destroyed your boat, just more slowly. Every single strike of the tool is a structural decision. Every cut is a calculation. In that sense, building a dugout canoe is less like carpentry and more like surgery, because the margin for error is almost zero. And here's what makes this form of boat building genuinely remarkable. Its greatest strength is its simplicity. No separate pieces, no joints, no seams where water can find a way in and start doing damage. It's carved from a single piece of wood, which means it's extraordinarily strong, surprisingly durable, and built to last. Historically, dugout canoes were used for transportation, for fishing, and yes, for warfare. But what always set them apart from one culture to the next was design. Because different environments demanded different boats. Coastal Pacific people built for open ocean swells. River cultures built for speed and current. Inland lake peoples built wide and stable for calm water. The shape, the weight, the profile, everything shifted to match the water it would face. The log Michael chose wasn't just any piece of timber. It was a Norfolk pine, a species native to Norfolk Island in the South Pacific. The trunk weighed close to 4 tons, and it had exactly the right profile for this kind of build: tall, straight, and relatively lightweight at the core. Norfolk pine also has an unusual property that made it prized by builders across the Pacific. It floats exceptionally well, low density, high buoyancy. The water doesn't want to take it down. But carving the hull is only half the battle. A light, strong hull that leaks is still a death trap. This is where ancient builders showed a level of problem-solving sophistication that's genuinely impressive even by modern standards. Traditional craftsmen use fire as a tool, burning the interior of the log to soften the wood, then scraping away the charred material. It sounds counterintuitive, but fire does something that a blade alone can't. It softens the grain, making removal far more precise and controlled. The risk was catastrophic and obvious. Overshoot by a fraction and you ruin everything. But the builders who mastered this technique were producing boats that lasted decades. And to seal the hull against water penetration. Aboriginal craftsmen harvested resins, gums, and natural pitch from the surrounding landscape. These compounds were sticky, waterproof, and flexible. They were worked into every crack, every seam, every point where moisture might find purchase. The result was a surface so tight that water had nowhere to enter. And as a side benefit, those same compounds protected the wood from rot, dramatically extending the working life of the vessel. But Michael's project wasn't purely a craftsmanship challenge. There was a historical anchor at the center of it, a man named James Murrill. In the 1840s, Murrill's ship went down off the coast of Queensland. He spent 42 days adrift on a makeshift raft in the waters just outside the Great Barrier Reef before he was rescued. His survival story is one of the most documented accounts of open water endurance in Australian colonial history. Michael wanted to inhabit that experience as directly as possible, not simulate it, reconstruct it. He spent 14 months using the same categories of tools that would have been available to someone in Murrill's era: traditional hand tools, traditional methods, traditional materials. He wasn't just building a boat. He was building an experience, one that would put him as close as modern life allows to the conditions Murrill faced on that reef. The finished vessel was a double outrigger design, a hybrid of traditional Pacific construction and Western techniques. The outriggers provide lateral stability in open water, and the sail harnesses wind in the way sailors have exploited it for millennia. But in the cultures where this form of boat was born, these vessels weren't just transportation. They were sacred objects. They appear in wedding ceremonies and initiation rites. They're present at funerals, at offerings to ancestors, at the great seasonal rituals that mark a community's relationship with the sea. Many of them are carved with symbols, stories encoded in the wood, passed from one generation to the next. In that sense, a traditional outrigger canoe isn't just a boat. It's a living document, a physical link between the people who built it and everyone who came before them. The knowledge of how to build one, the technique, the material selection, the carving sequences, the sealing methods, all of it was transmitted orally and through apprenticeship, elder to younger, for thousands of years. And today there are people actively working to keep those traditions from disappearing. Because these aren't just adventure stories, they're testimonies, proof of what human beings are capable of when stripped of modern infrastructure and forced to rely on craft, knowledge, and raw endurance. The men and women who crossed open ocean in dugout canoes and outriggers, who navigated by stars, by current, by the color of the water. They did something we still don't fully understand even now. And Michael Atkinson wanted to become part of that lineage. One log, one journey, one man testing the distance between who he thought he was and who he actually turned out to be. A dream that started with a chainsaw and ended somewhere on the reef. Finally, undeniably, real.